In the dead of night, the ground trembled. It was not the march of men, nor the distant echo of thunder. It was something far worse, the sound of something colossal, something unstoppable. The Roman soldiers gripped their spears, their breath shallow, their hearts pounding. They had heard the stories. They had whispered his name in fear. Hannibal, the man who had sworn to bring Rome to its knees, the man who had already humiliated their legions, shattered their armies, and struck terror into the very heart of the empire. But Hannibal did not march alone. He brought with him beasts of war, massive, towering creatures clad in iron and fury. The dust rose as their giant silhouettes emerged from the darkness. The Romans, battle-hardened and disciplined, had never seen anything like them. The elephants were unlike anything the world had ever known. Trained for war, bred for destruction. Their tusks gleamed in the moonlight, sharpened into spears. Their thick hides were covered in armor, their small, dark eyes filled with a mindless, unrelenting rage. Hannibal's men rode on their backs, spears in hand, ready to strike from above. The earth cracked beneath their weight as they advanced, shaking the very foundation of the battlefield. They were not mere animals. They were living war machines, but they were not born for battle. They were made for it. Taken as calves, raised in the brutal heat of Carthage, they were beaten, starved, and trained in fire and blood. Only the strongest survived. They learned to charge at the sound of war drums, to trample anything in their path, to fear nothing. Some turned on their masters and were slaughtered before they could become a threat. But those who endured became weapons. By the time they were ready for war, they were no longer beasts of the wild. They were the monsters of men. Then came the march. Hannibal, defying all logic, all military sense, led his army across the Alps. No man had done it before, no general had even attempted it. The freezing winds howled through the mountains, the ice cracked beneath their feet, but still they climbed. Roman scouts watched from a distance and laughed. No army could survive the crossing, certainly not one dragging enormous elephants through the snow. But step by agonizing step, through storms, through avalanches, through death itself, the war elephants pushed forward. Some fell to the cold, tumbling into the abyss below. But the rest emerged, battered, starving, but alive. When they descended into Italy, the Romans finally saw them, not in stories, not in nightmares, but in the flesh. It was here that the nightmare truly began. The first clash came with the Roman legions at Trebia. The soldiers stood firm, their shields locked, their spears raised. They had fought wars before. They had faced enemies from every corner of the world, but they had never fought monsters. When the war drum sounded, the elephants charged. The ground cracked beneath their feet. The earth shook as they thundered forward. Roman lines that had held against countless invasions simply crumbled. Men were lifted into the air by tusks and flung aside like dolls. Bones shattered beneath their massive feet. Spears broke against their thick hides. Arrows bounced harmlessly off their armor. The Romans had no defense. Those who survived fled in terror. They did not run from Hannibal's men. They did not run from cavalry or infantry. They ran from the war elephants, from the gods of destruction that had descended upon them. At Cannae, Hannibal delivered the worst defeat in Rome's history. An entire army, 86,000 strong, surrounded, trapped, crushed. The elephants trampled through the ranks, turning the battlefield into a sea of blood and broken bodies. By the end of the day, over 50,000 Romans lay dead. No battle before, and few after, would ever match its brutality. Rome, the invincible empire, had been torn apart by the sheer power of Hannibal's beasts. But Rome was not an empire that accepted defeat. They studied, they learned, they adapted. And in the final confrontation at Zama, they had an answer. As the elephants charged, the Roman legions did not break, they did not panic. This time, they had a plan. They opened their ranks, creating gaps in their formation. The elephants, expecting to crush everything in their path, ran straight through, finding nothing to trample, nothing to destroy. By the time they realized their mistake, the Romans had already turned on them. Spears drove into their flanks. Archers rained death from above. And for the first time, Hannibal's greatest weapons were rendered useless. Hannibal, undefeated for so long, had finally been outmaneuvered. Rome had won. The war was over. Carthage would never rise again, and neither would the war elephants. Rome ensured that no one would ever use them against them again. They hunted them. They slaughtered them. They wiped them from the battlefield forever. The mighty creatures that once crushed legions beneath their feet faded into legend. But the Romans would never forget the terror. The nightmares of men being crushed alive, the sound of bones snapping underfoot, the ground trembling as monsters descended upon them. Even as the centuries passed, the legend of Hannibal's war elephants remained. They were more than animals, more than weapons. They were living gods of war, and when they charged, the world shook beneath them.